ചടുലം സ്ഫുടതര നിപുണം കർമ്മം പാടാമീ നാടിൻ കാവൽ സംഗീതം നേടാം നന്മതൻ സ്നേഹം സന്തോഷം തേടാമെന്നെന്നും ശാന്തിയും സന്ദേശം ചേരാം നേരിന്റെ ലോകം കണ്ടെത്താൻ സത്യം പാലിക്കാൻ നിത്യം രക്ഷിക്കാൻ നിൽക്കുമ്പോൾ മൃദുഭാവം ദൃഢകൃത്യം ഇത് സേന നമ്മുടെ സേന കഠിനം ചലനം മൃദുമൃദുരം പ്രിയവചനം
ഞങ്ങൾക്കും നിങ്ങളാശ്രയം എന്നെന്നും നൽകും സാന്ത്വനം വഴികാട്ടുവാൻ ജനമൈത്രിയാൽ
കയ്യെത്തും ദൂരത്തെ സേന എന്നെഞ്ചിൻ കാവൽ തൻ സേന ശാന്തിരതം ഭയഭയരഹിതം വീരം കൃത്യം ചടുലം സ്ഫുടതര നിപുണം കർമ്മം അതിശക്താനിപുരം സ്വയം നിജ ഹൃദയം കഠിനം ചലനം മൃദുമൃദുരം പ്രിയവചനം ശാന്തിരതം ഭയഭയരഹിതം വീരം കൃത്യം ചടുലം സ്ഫുടതര നിപുണം കർമ്മം നമ്മുടെ സേന
Hey all, welcome to all joining here today. I'm Meera Jaydevan, a member of the Hackpay 2021 organizing team. The Kerala Police Cyberdome brings forth the fifth edition of Hackathon, Hackpay 2021, with a theme on demystifying the dark web. This time we have also organized a series of tech talks, which would be beneficial for the tech people as well as others. Before getting into the session, let's thank our pillars of support. We have Beagle Security as our technology partner, Cloud4C as our cloud partner, Mashup Stack as our knowledge partner, Ecoloop 360 as our sustainability partner, and Federal Bank and ICICI as our banking partners. Our community partners include ICMEC, OWASP, VSys India Affiliate, ASRG, Isaka Trivandrum Chapter, Nalcon, GTech ATFG, and AWS User Group Kuchi. We would also like to thank our partners BeSafe, CyberSec, and vConsole. Thanks to all for the support shown in organizing Hackpay. Today we have our 10th live tech talk and we are extremely delighted to present our speaker for the day, Mr. Adam Drabik, Chief Information Security Officer, Director of Risk and Compliance in CyberProof, a UST company. He has 20 years of CISO or executive level director experience in information security, cyber, IT resilience, privacy, risk management, and board of C-level advisory, and 25 years of experience in designing, delivering, and managing information and cybersecurity strategy, transformation, maturity improvements, program management, governance or risk compliance management, assurance, information and cybersecurity operations. He is a founding member of Club CISO, worldwide largest CISO community, Information Security Forum in Malaysia, Consumer Goods Security Forum in Europe, former industry advisor to UK Parliament on information security, privacy and data protection, and speaker and panelist on industry conferences. He is also the 2020 UK CSO 30 award winner. Before handing over to Adam, I would like to remind the audience that they can drop in their queries in the Hackpeace social media handles. Adam will be responding to the queries at the end of the session. So it's with great pleasure that I invite Adam to educate or enlighten us on the topic ransomware in action. Adam, the stage is all yours.
Thank you very much, Mira, and thank you for having me on the program. I'm delighted to be part of the that great initiative and also sharing the knowledge. As you've probably heard from uh, from the introduction, I'm very willing to share my wisdoms and knowledge that I've acquired over so many years of career in cybersecurity. Managing that whole madness, I guess, and keeping the criminals at bay and all sorts of attackers and perpetrators. So without further ado, I would like to invite you to my little talk about ransomware in action. So obviously everyone heard about ransomware nowadays, and we are having a very I think a situation in the world where ransomware is rampant and is a very sort of common way of attacking people and organizations. And I wanted to share a couple of thoughts that I have about what, how, but also the kind of thinking from a managerial perspective or from company and organizations management. So we may actually heard about all sorts of technical details about how ransomware works, how it disrupts organizations technically. I would rather focus on more the so what. So what is the true impact on the company from a view of board of directors and the key executives in the company? All right, so without further ado, let's start. What is ransomware? So interestingly, ransomware is generally a set of different sort of methods and disruptions that is generally delivered through malicious software, and that malicious software blocks the system, blocks the users, or in fact, probably the most popular, blocks access to data. I guess, what does it do, right? I mean, generally speaking, it's a method of extortion of money out of people and companies. So they are held to ransom, and they generally need to pay an agreed amount of money for the perpetrators to get their access back to their system, to users, and to data. Now, access to data, and this is where we probably hear about ransomware quite a lot nowadays, is that access to data is usually locked by actually encrypting the data with a relatively strong crypto algorithms. What it means is it's very unlikely that the companies will be able to decrypt them themselves without knowing effectively the decryption key. So those crypto algorithms are very strong, and to be honest, it is very difficult to break those crypto methods and kind of revert without using effectively the keys that are provided potentially by the perpetrators, by the attackers. But we'll come back to it, because that's not always the case. and I want to have some sort of interesting things to say further on. I think we seeing the ransomware and the rampant existence of it because fraud activities, especially cyber fraud activities, have been industrialized. So ransomware is really in existence, or generally holding people to ransom to get access to systems, users, data, have been there forever. I mean, for very long time, certainly 10 to 15 years. But nowadays, it is just so easy to launch such attack and really cause serious disruption. And that is because, effectively the cyber groups or the hacker groups have made it almost like a job, and well, it is a job for them, and they effectively industrialized that whole fraudulent activities. So the world is slightly different now, and it's more connected as well, which effectively means that the disruption can be done to anyone, anywhere, at any time. All right, so let's move on. So infection, how do we get infected by ransomware? So by far the most prolific cause is that effectively people are tricked to install a malicious software on their computer, either work computer or personal computer, any devices and so on. And that's when people are tricked. What I mean is people are kind of presented with something that looks reasonably legitimate, like, oh, your bank account details have to be confirmed, so please type in those details to unlock access to the bank. What you're actually doing, if you're not aware of those things and you don't spot that attempt, is actually giving your personal details, possibly passwords, email addresses, all sorts of other details, effectively back to criminals. Effectively, what we also seeing is that quite often systems are automatically attacked by effectively popular hacking techniques. So you can effectively download some tools from the internet, and you can construct your own ransomware software and potentially just start attacking others, right? Start spreading it. But it's usually caused by those automatic attacks, and that's why they don't really need a user interaction. So no one has to click yes or something. It's because they use the exploits for the unpatched and misconfigured systems. So it is possible because they're basically exploiting the old flaws and the old problems. There's obviously a set of attacks which use the so-called zero-day vulnerabilities. So this is where effectively, well, first a vulnerability is discovered by those hackers, and then effectively exploits are written to which no cure exists, no patch. These are very difficult, but they're also very difficult to find and very difficult to write. But generally speaking, it's all fairly fast evolving. So all those methods do change, as more patches are deployed, hackers move on to exploiting new patches. So that ransomware software constantly evolves, and it's more and more sophisticated as we speak. So why, the kind of the details of attack. Why are we getting attacked, and who is behind that? Well, why are we getting attacked is quite simple. Because it is a very lucrative business. People pay a lot of money to get access back to their data because they don't usually have the way to recover that data in any different way. How much are your photos worth to you? and possibly those photos which have been taken years ago, and you don't have store, you don't store them in any other place. How much are you going to pay for getting those photos of your kids when they were young, right? Once lost, it's kind of lost forever. Now we keep all the photos in digital form, so you can't go to a printed book anymore, right, to kind of reconstruct it. You really just had access to those files. So it's kind of playing even for private individuals into the sentiment of, well, it may be lost forever. And they demand a lot of money for it, right? So it's not a cheap service. Well, it's not really a service. It's a scam, but it is, right? So it also, and this is why, because it's a very low risk activity. So imagine doing fraud like that many years ago when there was no computers and you had to do that kind of in real life right next to the person. It was so easy to catch the individuals by having a kind of a police ambush. It's the person was, the perpetrator was risking their own self and well-being. I think they had to be there. They have to say something to you. They have to make a phone call that can be possibly traced. Now with the internet, well, it's a very anonymous kind of activity. It is very difficult to trace individuals, over the internet, especially those who really want to cover their tracks. So, you can be attacked from a country which is very far away and may not actually have any laws that prohibit that activity. So the chances of the bad guys ending up in jail are relatively low. So that's one of the reasons why it's such a, I think, an easy way for criminals to make money, that they now probably decrease the activities, physical activities. I mean, no one is, well, as in, there's not so much of holding people at gunpoint or threatening them with a knife when you can actually steal their money, through electronic ways, having zero risk, of getting in trouble for that. So we also have to think about it that it doesn't have to be just money. Some people just want to cause disruption, possibly including the closure of the business of your organization. So they just want to cause trouble to you. There may be attacks which are due to political or economic pressure, all sorts of activities of political groups or countries. Those attacks may also happen because the perpetrators want to gain some intelligence, some information from you, which is secret, steal your intellectual property, steal, effectively attack your, what I call it, crown jewels, right? And that could be just as well the motivation behind the attacks. So who is the people that are attacking us? So what's the kind of attribution that we're making so far? Well, it's not easy to attribute to start with, and for the reasons that I mentioned before, it is low risk for perpetrators because it's easy to hide, behind all sorts of, anonymization that internet allows and all sorts of services allow on the internet. But generally speaking, the perpetrators are mostly nowadays organized crime, those syndicates that have moved from physical crime more to cybercrime. Again, a lot more benefit and a lot less risk, right? So it kind of makes sense for them. So they've been investing an awful lot of money into growing that capability. Also, that could be just opportunistic hackers or scammers, single individuals that just I don't know, want to try their skills, or they just need the money in a particular moment. So there's a number of just single individuals that are trying to do that. But we also should not forget about potentially the state-sponsored activities, where all the disruption, all those acts are happening because of a specific political agenda of a country, and to make all sorts of political or economic pressures, as I mentioned before, or to basically have a kind of a hybrid war, as it's called nowadays. So not just a physical war out there, but also the war in the cyberspace. And that disruption to countries may actually happen, especially when critical national infrastructure is involved. We have probably all heard about quite a recent case of a large ransomware attack, which was launched on the company in America, in the States. I think it was called Colonial Pipeline. It's basically a main pipeline to transport oil and gas, through the and kind of fossil fuel, and supply into several large areas within the United States. And that operation has been brought to a halt. And it was so difficult to deal with it that there were rumors that the management of that company needed to pay millions of dollars in ransom in order to kind of regain control over their business operations. And it resulted with shortage of fuel to many millions of American citizens, right? So those things do happen as well. So moving on, let's have a look at maybe some other aspects of ransomware. So here I just want to briefly talk about the technical consequences. So what happens when you get attacked by ransomware? Well, your system is effectively locked out, or a number of systems. Users are locked out, and generally computer systems are not accessible. So effectively, you lose the ability for this whole infrastructure and applications and people to actually do any kind of meaningful work on computers. As we now know, pretty much everything is controlled by computers now, and a lot of business processes rely on computers, if not all business processes. Therefore, that effectively leads to a serious disruption, but I'll cover it in a second. Important, and that's what we see a lot, is documents and other important data, like photos on the host, which is being attacked, are basically being encrypted. So we mentioned about those cryptographic methods of an encryption that is then deployed. So effectively, the system may still work, but all your documents are effectively turned into unreadable form. And you would need those decryption keys and program in order to a certain extent, revert the process and go back to their original form. Interestingly, that attack is it's not necessarily just limited to that particular computer, but actually it uses the context of that particular compromised account to effectively encrypt anything, anywhere that particular computer or account has write access to. So in order to encrypt a document, obviously the write access is needed because the document is being overwritten by its encrypted version. So quite often, when users have large level of access to document repositories, or all sorts of network shares and storage, all of it gets encrypted, not just their personal documents, right? So, or not just documents on their computer. So very important to have access controls sort of well sorted. Also, online backups often get encrypted. Well, as long as the, let's call it the virus or that malicious software is able to overwrite your backup data, it'll encrypt it also. So not only you end up with your system encrypted, but also your backups encrypted. I will give you in a second an example of a company that went out of business, and that was one of the reasons. Attackers often gain admin access and backdoor rootkits are installed. So effectively what it means is that apart from encrypting documents, let's say on your computer, or blocking access, very often those hackers will install software that allow them to control your PC. And that is very rarely deleted as part of the paying your ransom and kind of recovering thing. So effectively, you may think that it's all resolved, but the attackers can just re-encrypt all the documents or siphon them out of your computers, out of your systems. They can sell the information, they can change it. They basically are admins on that particular box. That is a very, very serious threat. So think about it when paying your ransoms, and what are you going to do about it? What's your strategy is. We will cover that in a second. But also technically, infection very often spreads laterally to other machines. So not only your main host that gets attacked, but it tries to propagate itself to other machines, users, and other data. So sometimes when known vulnerabilities are used and known exploits as part of the kind of vector of attack, one computer gets obviously infected first, and then from there it spreads further like cancer into your whole network of machines. So these were the, a couple of technical details. I mean, they're not very technical, and obviously, I'm sure you can read to nth degree the details of different ransomware attacks and sort of intricate technical details about what happens, what mechanisms are involved, how it propagates, and what have you. So for those who are interested, I encourage you to read more on the internet. And listen to people much more competent than me to explain those intricate details. But I want to concentrate on something which is very rarely kind of covered across IT industry, security, and others, which is operational or managerial consequences. What happens to businesses, to organizations, and to people when this kind of attack happens? So this is a kind of a view where you step away from bits and bytes and technology and the detail and have a look at the holistic situation. So what happens then? So we can see that, for example, business transactions cannot be executed and operations is seriously disrupted or halted. Here is our example of Colonial Pipeline, right? Its business transactions could not be executed. Their operations, pumping oil from, through the pipeline to supply a number of states, was completely disrupted and had to be halted. So, there was no business going on. Obviously, the demands for ransoms are usually being made. If the perpetrators are after money, they will, just like when they kidnap people, right? They will eventually phone the other people asking for payments for release of control. The amounts which are involved here are eye-watering, right? It's very large sums of money. Something else that will cost an organization as well is, when you get attacked and your operations is blocked, when Potentially your data is leaking out, because that could also be part of that, and we'll cover it in a second. You may need to involve external legal counsels, legal company, legal representation. These are very, very expensive services. And those kind of legal trouble may go on for years for organizations. So that's a huge cost of just serving that from a legal perspective. Also, similar to that, public relations. You may need to have specific information campaign for people, for customers, for shareholders, for example. Uh, you know, Results of that, or the consequence of such a cyber incident, are potentially huge from a financial perspective, not just from a reputational perspective. Attackers disclose confidential documents to the public. That also happens. That is, for example, to possibly force the management of organizations to pay the ransom. Here is the threat, and here is the validation of the threat. Here is your confidential document, and we just published it on Facebook or WikiLeaks or whatever, right? Pastebin. That has many consequences, because if those confidential documents are of really sensitive nature, all sorts of trouble may actually arise, and I'll cover it in a second. But potentially you may actually pay the ransom, and attackers will still disclose everything, because in the meantime they siphoned out all the they took a copy of all the documents that you have in your company and just published them. So they received the payment, and then all your company secrets are basically there in the open. That is certainly not a desirable situation, and can actually, for some organization, mean the end of the business. The attackers may actually sell copies of information to other criminals. So while you're assuming that they just want the money to unlock the access to this data and to decrypt it, well, they'll do that, right? But on top of that, they'll earn some more money by selling copies of information, or those rootkits, or access to it. They basically hand you over to the next bad guy. So those things actually do happen as well. So the fact that you've been scammed, even personally, out of some credit card details, and there is some rogue transactions coming, the fact that you paid someone doesn't mean that those demands will stop. There's going to be the same guys, or maybe some other guys, effectively repeating the scam on you over and over, or trying to get you in some other way. Coming back to that potential kind of leaks of documents and information, the company may be forced to make disclosures to regulatory authorities, their customers, and potentially face huge fines, contractual penalties with their customers, especially when it's a business-to-business relationship, and potentially class action. So end consumers, hundreds of people, if not thousands of people, getting together and launch that kind of combined lawsuit against your company, against your organization. That obviously may bring an awful dent to your reputation and business operation, business performance, everything. It's and may have quite a long-lasting financial consequences. Those class actions, those fines and contractual penalties usually means, again, involvement of a very, very expensive lawyers, and really years of proceedings, right? And then obviously the settlements, if that's what courts decide, or regulators decide. So it has this very, very, it may be a short ransomware attack, and you may think that short term you've resolved the issue and you recovered within a week or two. The actual long-lasting consequences may be there for years, 3, 5, 7 years. That's not unheard of. So be aware of that. Well, I'm going to state the obvious now, but the loss of reputation and the sort of prolonged impact on operations. So when your business, your company is out of operations for a long period, well, what would that mean to the frontline business? Well, it usually, the customers are afraid, they're walking away, which in effect means long-term loss of business. And that obviously leads to loss of revenue, and that is current and future. So there is no growth. In fact, the business will be shrinking. That's quite a significant consequence to any company, and that period of time may be very short now. People switch to different suppliers in a split second now. There may be no customers very, very soon for you if you're getting attacked and seriously disrupted by, for example, ransomware. Well, interestingly, cyber insurance policies are now being sold by insurance companies. So you may actually manage your risks through risk transfer like that, like taking an insurance policy. The trouble is, when the worst thing happen, you may actually find out that by reading the small print, they basically say that their policy does not cover ransoms, right? Paying the ransoms. So you wouldn't rely on effectively insurer to take the burden, or at least some of the burden of the financial risk here. So you have to then effectively gather and pay the money from your operational budgets or bank loans. But then bank loans are not necessarily made on on a basis of that you need them to pay the ransom. That may actually be an illegal activity, and the banks may not actually give effectively the loans to companies in need to pay ransoms. They may not be allowed to do that. There may be a breach of regulation. So there is a lot of complex I would say scenarios around that. I would say that if you either considering taking a cyber insurance policy or you have one, just make sure that read all the terms and conditions, and you really understand of what sort of financial help or recovery will be available to you if that sort of things happen to you. You may be actually quite surprised how limited that help may be, when those policies are written. In fact, there has been some recent announcements in the media about certain insurers wanting to effectively exclude paying ransoms as from the effectively insurance policy offers, and that is because the attacks got so successful and so are so widespread that those insurance companies are basically losing money on those cyber insurance policies. So they changed the terms now. So you may not really be covered as much as you thought that you are, especially in the future. Quite an interesting impact as well is even kind of going a little bit further. If your company is publicly listed, think about the impact it may have on investor confidence. So how about the share price, right? Following major cyber intrusions, cyber attacks, ransomware attacks, you can see the share price of many businesses going significantly down. So the perceived value of the company or the market capitalization of those businesses are significantly lower than before the attack. That, in effect, may cause another sort of grave business consequence, which is potential hostile takeover. If the company was worth 10 million and your main competitor couldn't really afford 10 million to buy you and kind of either absorb you or put you out of business or close you down in order for them to make advantage of the whole market. When your company is only worth 3 million, they may suddenly be able to do that. And that is how, sometimes a cyber incident may actually lead to quite significant change in business reality for organization, and actually business risks also from a financial and kind of ownership perspective. The ultimate consequence of I guess going into a major cyber attack, specifically a ransomware attack, could be that disruption that leads to effectively going completely out of business. I have an example. The company's name is Travelex, and that's the company that generally provided money exchange services, mainly on the airports, but also they were provider as a money exchanger for kind of wholesale banks and large institutions. They have been, in fact, attacked. The ransomware has made such a big mess, I think, inside the company that it basically stopped trading. It couldn't actually exchange any money. The banks were seriously, and the institutional customers have been seriously affected, and they basically went and started to change money with other other companies. Travelex was also at the same time affected by obviously the global ban on travel because of the beginning of COVID. And effectively what that means is that their business effectively imploded and collapsed. So Travelex is no more. So that's a warning story for everyone who thinks that cyber incident may not contribute, not really will not contribute to a business closure. It may, and it has historically. So here is our typical ethical dilemma that we have here, right? To paraphrase William Shakespeare, to pay or not to pay. So should we pay ransoms? Well, here is the choice that we have. If we are going to pay the money to the attacker, to the bad guys, it'll make us weaker. All this money is taken away from us, either growing our businesses or basically even making our security stronger. And it makes us weaker. We can't anymore spend on those particular things. And it makes the attacker stronger. So they will be able to attack others and possibly us again and be even more competent with it. They will have more means to it. They will have better equipment, better connectivity, just being more proficient and richer in doing that. So it's a kind of a conflict or an economy of conflict that, by the way, in my opinion, we generally not going to win, because every dollar, every pound, every rupee that is taken away from us makes us weaker and makes attackers stronger. And in the long term, the attackers will win. And that's certainly a very undesirable situation for us. But on the other hand, should we then suffer the massive disruption of our business, as I've explained, and facing all those grave consequences, and try to recover from those massive attacks without kind of feeding the beast, without effectively giving the satisfaction money and the benefit to the attackers? It is very difficult to make those choices. And I certainly recommend that choice to be made with all the executive leaders being present and taking part and taking responsibility for that decision. There is no right or wrong answer here. I mean, yes, ethically, we should not really be working with cyber criminals, period. But sometimes the need for survival may, in certain circumstances, justify, some form of cooperation and possibly payments. I would recommend not to pay, but I do understand that there is certain circumstances where this is unavoidable. We'll cover that in a second. Now, my personal opinion, right? Bitcoin, great idea in general, right? Theoretical ideas, they're generally great. And Alfred Nobel invented dynamite, really thinking that it's going to just help everyone. And he was quite surprised. So he would be certainly quite surprised that most of its use was actually to kill others rather than actually make our life easier, unfortunately. So in a similar way, Bitcoin and generally cryptocurrencies are the kind of the currency of choice for criminals. And there is a number of reasons for that, but the main one is that it's very difficult to effectively catch anyone red-handed when we're talking about dealing with cryptocurrency, because they do provide a level of anonymity, and it is kind of relatively easy to launder the money through Bitcoin transactions or cryptocurrency transactions. On top of that, they're easy to hide because you can keep Bitcoins and cryptocurrency in purely digital form. You don't actually have to have any physical, items, I think, like cash, right? There is no banknote. That provides, again, with that level of flexibility that criminals really enjoy. And also, on top of that, because of raising value, especially of Bitcoin, a Bitcoin with, a few Bitcoins that they gained a couple of years ago are now worth an absolute fortune. So they kind of become investors as well, or speculators in Bitcoins. They constantly being fed with more Bitcoins because people pay ransoms. It's an industry now, right? And unfortunately, Bitcoin is a kind of provides the perfect means for the cyber criminals to hide their tracks. Well, as I mentioned before, there's also the legal aspects of paying ransoms. I mean, you probably have heard that some governments have already announced that they either completely banning Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, and one of the main reasons is because it's the currency of choice of criminals. But also there is no kind of state control over it. But they also are now thinking about banning paying ransoms because, again, it feeds the criminals. It instead of making them weaker, it makes them stronger. So a lot of I think we're going to see quite a lot of initiatives, legislative initiatives in many countries to outlaw paying ransoms. That's possibly going to prevent organizations to pay the criminals, and the criminals will go away and stop using ransomware because it's pointless. They're not going to get any money out of it. However, the main message here is that there is no guarantees and no fair play. We're dealing with criminals. Even if we pay them ransom, they may absolutely do nothing. You may get no keys, you may get fake keys, you may get no message at all. The money is spent, the money went out forever, it's forever lost, and you're still in the same situation as a moment before, not paying that ransom. You're still having completely locked out with all the systems still inaccessible, all your data still encrypted. So that's kind of one aspect of it. So remember that. There is no morals there. They're criminals anyway. They will not react to any sub stories. It's just not, right? They're in the business of not caring, right? All they care is your money, extorting money out of you. That's all they care about, nothing else. Also, you have to bear in mind what I've mentioned before, that you may be then sold to some other people to extort the money. So the fact that you've paid the ransom, and maybe the fact that some of your data have been deciphered, does not actually mean that those technical hacks are gone from your system. effectively you have to assume that your system is still under full control over those perpetrators until you rebuild everything, like literally reconstruct every single machine that was sort of affected. That's the hard part. So think about the amount of effort and money involved in rebuilding everything from scratch and checking and rechecking and testing. It is a very, very difficult task. So how to improve that? There's a lot of lists and we can do an awful lot of things, right? But effectively, how do we make ourselves more resilient against ransomware attacks? Some of it will reduce the likelihood of us being attacked. Some of it will possibly reduce the impact. But generally speaking, we need to have a way of recovering from it, right? So even if we are affected. So here is my a couple of bullet points around what we can do to be a little bit more prepared, I guess. Well, first and foremost, review and test your backups and restore processes. Make sure that those backups are not prone to be also encrypted along with the rest of your systems, just like Travelex, and being unable to restore it because you needed the key to restore it as well, right? So my opinion, review the way how you do those backups. If you're just an end user at home, just a regular person using technology, maybe consider having an external USB drive, right? And just plug it in, copy your data onto it every now and then, and just hide it in a drawer when it's disconnected. Well, if your machine gets infected with ransomware and stuff, you can always just completely format it, rebuild it, and then just copy your data back. I mean, because your data is completely offline. So that's my tip for many of you. I think you also, especially if you're a larger organization, you have to review and improve your ability to respond and recover from security incidents. So this is always an area that is worth investing effort and money. Are you able? How quickly you are able to recover from it? Maybe run some simulations and see what you can still improve in your response. I think this is worth investing some of the effort. I think you need to patch your systems quickly and full stack of software. So I've seen and I've observed over so many years of experience in so many industries and so many companies, the fact that systems are generally updated, but it takes forever to roll out those updates because everything has to be tested to nth degree. And to be honest, it's very rarely needed. Those patches are generally quite good nowadays. I mean, very rarely we would get a patch that would kind of affect our systems in a bad way. So sometimes speed is better than accuracy. If something doesn't work, you can always revert, and uninstall that particular patch. If you get malware attacked, you can't kind of easily revert it, right? It's going to be a main problem. I also seen that a lot of organizations still thinks that Microsoft Windows is what you patch. No, it's all software that you have, and not just the software that what you have, but also what your IT suppliers are managing for you. So make sure that your suppliers of technology also have the right and fast way of patching their systems. Effectively, if you remove vulnerabilities, you remove the vector of attack, right? You remove the weakness which is being exploited. So you can completely reduce or significantly reduce the chances of being attacked. You need to implement your, the appropriate access controls, like role-based access control, right? So when you think about whether people need the right access to absolutely your full libraries of documents, maybe that's not the case. So even if they get attacked, not all your documents will be, immediately kind of encrypted, only a small amount, which can be manageable. You need to also look at things like web application firewalls. So when it's effectively technologies that allow to provide some sort of filtering or validation of where you're being sent, what kind of response, is there any kind of fake representation, is there any malicious activity which is going on, something which is not planned as an input, and obviously implement things like multi-factor authentication. So, that significantly reduces the risk of effectively perpetrators collecting, just taking someone's username and password, because they would also need to, for example, take control over their phone or maybe some other parameter which is used for multi-factor authentication. So it's making the job of criminals a lot more difficult if you have those implemented. Ensure the right configurations of systems, because it's not always just the sort of a gap in a software, as in a mistake, an error, security error in a software that causes the trouble. Sometimes it's just poor configuration. So kind of an obvious thing. Ensure you have contacts for to specialist companies that may be able to help you if needed. In the heat of the battle, when you have to deal with so many inquiries and so many problems, it's nice to have that kind of phone book to companies. Oh yeah, for security help, there is company 1, company 2, company 3, company 4 that I can call. I'll just make those phone calls. I don't have to waste another half an hour to browse through internet to see whether this is any good company. Think in advance, make some contacts, maybe even sign some general sort of letters of, I call it kind of memorandum letters, letters of understanding, to establish a business kind of relationship with some of those providers. So when the worst happens, you have your way paved, to get those services quickly, no hesitation. Straight away, the company can step in and help you out. You need to test often, which is effectively vulnerability assessments and pen tests. And more importantly, fix issues that have been found. For years, I've been dealing with organizations that have tested a lot, but fixed very little. So they were basically saying, yeah, the server is still red, or that machine, yeah, we know it's vulnerable for the last 2 years, but yeah, another report that will say it's still bad if you haven't fixed anything, is not going to make the situation better. You need to invest your efforts in making sure that this full circle of software maintenance is actually fulfilled and the fix actually happens. Obviously, we need to also concentrate on people. So this is about reviewing and improving general security awareness. So, think about some phishing exercises and kind of trying to educate people of what to do and what not to do, and kind of make sure that you steer them towards making the right choices, right? So not necessarily being a specialist on security, but really reacting properly. And the best advice always for people is, if you're not sure, check with a specialist, right? Phone a security department. They'll probably be much better equipped to judge if something is a scam or it's not, whether you should put your logon credentials into that weird thing or not, or out of the blue it starts to ask you for passwords and usernames. It's never happened before, and suddenly you're faced with that. It looks suspicious. Maybe check with IT department, of what's happening, or with the security guys. I think, again, we've covered that quite a bit already. Consider risk sharing scenarios. For example, taking cyber insurance. That can help you financially, especially when dealing with a very expensive recovery process from an incident. And in general, and that's an advice, I think, to especially the CEOs and the leaders of organizations and companies and government units and what have you, generally think about increasing investment in cybersecurity, business continuity, and resilience. That may actually prevent your, the total collapse of your business. And I think on that note, I'll finish sharing the words of wisdom from Adam, and I would certainly welcome any questions now. I'm hoping that little presentation was quite engaging and interesting.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot, Adam. And it was a very interesting session. So now we are open to the Q&A. Yeah. We have a question from Rajesh. Is Mac OS and Linux protect from ransomware attack compared to Windows?
That is an interesting question. I don't think there is systems which are completely ransomware free, but I think if you think about the law of chances, right? If the perpetrators are focusing, for example, on specifically potentially encrypting application server on the internet, they'll be writing the right scripts and they'll be attacking Linux servers because that's what's more prominent as a server on the internet, right? So they have much more chances of success if they're going to exploit some weaknesses in Linux or Unix like software. However, if there is, general corporate user, let's say, or general public out there, targeted for, small ransomware of, just encrypting your documents on your laptop and maybe some family photos and whatever else, you have on that, probably predominant majority, I would say, of people still use Windows. So, those specific exploits are written for Windows because they just have more chances of statistical success of hitting, the target systems. So yes, I mean, obviously, Windows probably historically has kind of more gaps, especially when it's unpatched. And we kind of hear about it more often because it was the more predominant platform for so many years. But I'm just saying that just because you're running Linux or Mac OS does not make you completely safe from ransomware. It may actually, you may still be hit by rootkits that will effectively do exactly that, encrypt your whole systems.
Next, we have a question from Anna. Please tell some tips to prevent ransomware attack.
Well, the last slide that I was showing was actually all about those tips. So, maybe this question actually came a little bit earlier in the session, but I think the key to that is, I think, good backups, right? So it's not just preventing ransomware; it's how to recover, right? We may always be hit by it because some hidden feature in some software that we may just be happening to use may get exploited, and then we'll get hit by it, right? Even if we very well prepared on all the other fronts, we need to have ability to recover, because if we don't, the only kind of choice is to pay. What are you going to do if you don't have the money? That's a challenge. That means that you've lost everything, and that's that's something that you need to consider. But I think, generally speaking, it's the technical preparation, of which we've covered some, at least here, and also kind of mental preparation, as in being vigilant, and teaching yourselves and the other people around you in what to click, what not to click, how to spot, this little scams, how to spot the Russian Cyrillic A rather than the English A in the address when it says bank, because that's not super visible to kind of untrained eye, but the moment that you you kind of make people aware, they can suddenly spot it straight away, right? It's been so obvious once pointed out to. It's almost like, spot the 10 differences between the two pictures. At the beginning, when your eyes are not trained, when your brain is not concentrating, it looks identical. But once you start noticing the differences and know what to look for, it's obvious. It's there to start with. How on earth people don't see it? I'm sort of thinking that it's the same kind of brain training that we have to do to ourselves and other people in order to help us to prevent cybercrime effectively, to make our common sense having more sense.
Okay, next question is from Mohammed Jassim. Does ransomware affect write protected files?
Um, it depends on which context this software is running on, right? So if it effectively runs on user profile, right? So it kind of inherits your personal account. It generally would encrypt only those files that it has write permission on. I mean, probably some stupid way of deploying ransomware is to, take a clear text document, so original document, and then create a copy of it, which is in fact, well, or encrypted, but then the original is still there. So you just, it's pointless to do it that way. You'd never pay if you had your original document. However, if the software runs under the kind of more admin accounts like system or super user account, is effectively launched, very often those accounts would have rights to overwrite permissions to files, and that may actually happen before there is a sort of a more generic launch to encrypt. So especially when those kind of root or super user or admin accounts are compromised, for example, the consequences are much greater because sometimes those write protection can be kind of overcome, right?
Okay. Next, we have a question from Anand. What steps should an organization take to ensure data is protected if a ransomware attack occurs?
Sorry, can you display the question again? Because
Yeah.
I was reading it, but it was quite long.
Okay. I will read it. What steps should an organization take to ensure data is protected if a ransomware attack occurs?
Well, if the ransomware attack occurs, I mean, is it before the ransomware attacks or is it after, right? So I think when we talk about before, then I've actually spoken about the whole set of measures which may be taken, to kind of prevent. However, if the ransomware is happening and kind of encryption starts, and you want to kind of break it, my advice would be literally switch off the machine straight away, because encrypting files, it's an iterative process. So effectively, the program that does that takes the first 5 files and then it encrypts it. Then it takes another 5 files or whatever. It can be 50 at a time. But the point is, if you have 300 million files, it takes time to encrypt everything. When you physically press a button and cut the power, that software only progressed so far. So you may actually be able to break that sort of sequence of encryption and only end up with a small amount being encrypted while the others are still fine. So that's a kind of a one way of containing and immediately reacting to a ransomware attack. The other method is to obviously isolate the hosts on the networks, or physically. I mean, the best method is always just pull the plug from the switch, right? But not always available, especially nowadays, right? But the point is, trying to isolate computers so there is no lateral movements from one machine to the other when the kind of malware moves or infects further and further hosts, right? So if you manage to kind of isolate an office or a particular computer, even, you end up with just one computer being kind of encrypted and not your whole network. So that's another way of kind of reacting fast in order to save as much as you can, right? And having less less trouble. But I would say the another thing which I've mentioned before is ensure that you immediately get possession on your backup of your backups, and your recovery process from backups is done in a way that your machine is no longer susceptible to attack. Because if you're going to restore from backup and when the machine gets immediately infected and re-encrypts everything, you're going to be, it's a kind of a cat and mouse kind of situation where you're constantly chasing, right? And it'll never end. So when you're rebuilding your systems, you need to rebuild them in a kind of a safe environment, or possibly being isolated, and then you need to apply your protections before you kind of put it back into true production. So that's another tip.
Okay, so it's a question from my side. Can ransomware encrypt an encrypted drive?
Can ransomware encrypt a drive? Yes, it can.
Encrypted drive, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
And can
either at the file level. It's also possible to encrypt at the block level. So, if you sort of more familiar with Unix systems or more kind of hardware level stuff, it's all possible. It's all data. If there is data on the other end, it can be encrypted, right? So, generally speaking, I wouldn't rule, any form of encryption out.
also, okay, yeah. I will go to the next question. It's from Sudesh. We hear a lot about air gapping data and having an offline copy. How offline does tape backup data need to be?
Oh, that's a fantastic conversation for another 2-hour session, I guess, right? About, business continuity and kind of resilience. And especially in a context of, also natural disasters, right? I mean, for ransomware, I think you know, if we go back, let's say, to my slightly younger years, let's say 20 years ago, the DLT tapes. I mean, I'm sure some of you remember DLT tapes or LTO tapes were predominant technology then for keeping the backups, and you effectively had a cassette, the tape cassette, that you kind of insert, and then you kind of swap them on daily basis and take daily backups. Fairly an old way of doing it, but God, it's very good methods to actually sort of go back to that way of doing the backups in order to be kind of, I'm not saying ransomware is safe, but being able to recover relatively quickly. Because those tapes, when you take them out and and put in a cupboard, well, they can be overwritten. So it's actually a very good way. However, I've also seen an awful lot of burnt computer rooms that had their servers burned and the cupboard with the tapes burned. So talking about those natural disasters and fires and floods, it's always a good idea to keep your backup tapes in a different location. At least some of them. Like, you keep your weekly backup somewhere off-site, in a different building, maybe even in a different town or city, or geographically spread. I'm just, this is not ransomware advice, but just a good practice in terms of how to keep backups. I would say that offline copy or certain snapshots even monthly snapshot, keep it somewhere off site, and or keep a disk of it somewhere off site, keep it in one of your other offices, and so on. You have to review what works for you and your applications and data loss. You have to define your RTOs and RPOs, which is recovery time objective and the recovery point objective. You need to kind of get a little bit more into disaster recovery and business continuity kind of topics to really decide what the best scenarios for you are, and how much money and how much effort you want to actually invest into it to be the most effective.
Okay. Next is from in24 Tech. What would be ransomware attacks have become so prevalent over the last few years?
Easy way to make money. I mean, I mentioned that before. It's very lucrative, very well-paying business for literally taking no risks, and that's why it's so prevalent now. And also technology now, and the way how we connect it, and everything is connected, allowed even more vectors of attack, even more success for the attackers, right? And easier way of causing the disruption for all of us, right? And then forcing us to pay. All right. I think that's how much time we had for questions and so on.
Yeah.
I'm sincerely hoping that it was kind of an interesting take on ransomware, because again, I didn't really want to focus on the pure technical aspect of it, but more of a that kind of business overview of what happens, what kind of choices need to be made in the boardroom by the top directors, how difficult it is for companies, not just from a technical perspective, but business performance and survival perspective. So, I'm gonna hand over back to the organizers, and well, obviously, if anyone wants to continue that discussion, I'm sure we welcome any kind of feedbacks, and also, I'm quite active on LinkedIn, so if you look up my name, you can possibly follow me and see some of my publications and other sort of speeches around security, and especially security management. There's an awful lot of great publications on the internet around ransomware, so I encourage everyone that is interested in that just to read more and sort of study themselves.
Okay. Thanks, Adams. That was a interesting and a wonderful interaction, and we are very grateful for your knowledge and your notions. And we obtained like a great understanding and the ways or approaches to deal with it. So, on behalf of Hackbee, I extend a sincere thanks to you for being with us in this event. Okay, thanks to all who tuned in today. And if you have any additional queries, as he said, you can reach out to Adam through his LinkedIn profile. And we have our next session scheduled for Friday. So please tune into our channels for more updates. See you all again on Friday. Stay safe. Thank you.